The first thing I heard on my wedding morning was not music. It was the sound of fabric being torn, slow and deliberate, like a punishment being carried out on purpose. Everyone tells you to remember the details of that day, the smell of the flowers, the color of the sky, the sound of your own heartbeat. Nobody tells you to remember the sound of scissors closing on silk, but I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. My name is Danielle Reyes, and before I tell you what happened in that room, I want you to understand something. The three women standing over my ruined dress that morning believed they were ending my story. What they actually did was write the ending to their own. Stay with me, because the way this one finishes is worth every minute it takes to get there. When I pushed open the door to the dressing room, my gown was already on the floor. The bodice had been split down the front, and the skirt lay in pale ribbons scattered across a rug that still smelled faintly of steam and hairspray. My three bridesmaids stood over the wreckage with a pair of sewing scissors between them, and for one long second, nobody said a word. Then Brianna smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was satisfied, the kind of smile a person wears when they have just finished a job they had been looking forward to for a long time. I could not breathe. The room smelled like a burnt curling iron and crushed gardenias, and underneath that, something else. The particular scent of ruined silk, a smell I did not know existed until that exact moment. It smelled like a wet library book, like something that used to matter. Under my bare feet were seed pearls, dozens of them, rolling slowly toward the air vents. The hem my grandmother had helped me pin 2 weeks before she passed away lay in 2 separate pieces on the carpet. Courtney set her mimosa down on the vanity like she was bored of the whole scene. "Do not look at us like that, Danny," she said. "Somebody had to say something before you humiliated yourself in front of his family." Sophia would not meet my eyes. She kept turning the scissors over in her hand, admiring them the way someone admires a piece of jewelry. I looked at the damage. The bodice had 2 long slashes across the front. One sleeve had been cut clean off and thrown onto the makeup chair like garbage. And above the mirror, written in my own lipstick, in handwriting I recognized instantly as Brianna's, were 3 words. "Know your place." For about 5 seconds, I believed my wedding was over. On the 6th second, I understood something else entirely. These 3 women had not destroyed my future. They had just signed the end of their own story, in thread and lipstick, without realizing it. Up until that morning, I believed I was marrying a quiet contractor named Ethan Cole, a man who smelled like sawdust and coffee and always kept a pencil behind his ear. He told me his family kept to themselves, that they did not like talking about money, that his father had old-fashioned ideas about weddings being simple affairs. What he did not tell me was that Cole was not just a name on a business card. I did not know that the Cole family owned a large share of the commercial real estate on the east side of the city, 3 regional hotel chains, and a private equity fund that had quietly bought out 2 of my own bridesmaids' employers within the past year. I did not know that the soft-spoken man who fixed my leaking kitchen faucet on our 3rd date was the only son who had walked away from boardrooms to swing a hammer instead. And I certainly did not know that his mother, Margaret Cole, had already seen exactly what my bridesmaids were capable of, weeks before they ever picked up those scissors. But before that locked door, before the gown on the floor, before the box wrapped in gray satin that would change everything, there were months of small cruelties. I called them jokes at the time. I was wrong. I met Ethan at a community garden cleanup, of all places. I was there volunteering with kids from the after-school program I ran. He showed up in work boots with a truck full of donated lumber for the new planter beds. He was not flashy. He was not trying to impress anyone. He simply knew how to build things, and he was patient about it, showing an 8-year-old how to hammer a nail straight, without once mentioning that he had just gotten mud on a watch worth more than most people's rent. That patience is what disarmed me. In a city where everyone seemed to be selling a filtered version of themselves, Ethan talked about joists and grout and soil quality. I fell for the fact that he did not need to dazzle anyone. My mother had been a seamstress her entire life, working out of a cramped shop that smelled like steam and chalk dust, dressing brides who wanted, for one single day, to feel like the most important woman in the room. My father left when I was 6 years old. I grew up learning that grace does not always come from money. Sometimes it comes from standing up straight when someone is trying to make you apologize for existing. That is why Ethan felt like rest. He never asked what I made in a year. He never flinched at my studio apartment with the radiator that clanked all night long. The first time he came over, he fixed a cracked flower pot on my fire escape and left a sprig of rosemary on my counter. "So it smells like something is growing," he said, "even if you do not have a yard." With Brianna, Courtney, and Sophia, everything had quietly become a scoreboard. How much was the ring? Who was paying for the venue? What designer made the dress? They never called it nosiness. They called it looking out for me. When Ethan proposed, it was in the greenhouse behind his uncle's nursery, surrounded by orchids he had been secretly tending for weeks. There was no photographer, no string quartet, only condensation dripping off the glass panes and his hand shaking as he opened a small velvet box holding a modest emerald ring. He told me he did not want to buy me a spectacle. He wanted to build me a life. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Brianna was the first to congratulate me. She was also the first to eye the ring like she was pricing it. "It is sweet," she said. "Very handmade looking." The word handmade landed like a needle under my skin. Courtney added, all sugar in her voice, "What matters is that he loves you. Not everyone needs a big rock." Sophia chimed in that a simple wedding could be charming, as long as I did not try too hard to look like old money. I laughed it off. Back then, I still believed they were my friends, that their bitterness was just habit and not something sharper. I was wrong about that too. It would take a woman in a navy dress, standing perfectly still in a ruined dressing room, to show me exactly how wrong I had been. The first real warning came 3 weeks after the proposal, at a dinner Courtney hosted in her high-rise apartment, the kind with a view of the skyline and furniture nobody was actually allowed to sit on. Brianna brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Sophia brought flowers, but made a point of mentioning they were not from the corner shop. I brought a batch of lemon shortbread I had baked myself. "Oh, how sweet," Courtney said, opening the tin like it was something fragile and a little embarrassing. Sophia set out plates on the marble island. "Ethan does not really have people here, does he?" she asked. "He does," I said. "They are just private." Sophia rested her fork against her plate. Private is a very convenient word when there is not much to show off. Courtney laughed softly through her nose. "Do not be mean. Maybe they have got that whole rustic charm thing going on." I did not defend Ethan the way I should have. I smiled, changed the subject, and hated my own restraint the entire drive home. When I got back to my apartment, I found him kneeling in the hallway, watering the neighbor's ferns because she had sprained her ankle and could not do it herself. He had dirt on his shoes and a grass stain on his sleeve. "What happened?" he asked, reading my face. "Nothing," I said. He set down the watering can. "Every time you say nothing," he told me, "you look like you are carrying a box you do not want to put down." I did not tell him the truth. I still was not ready to admit that grown women could make me feel 16 again, waiting for approval at a table that would never quite have a seat for me. As the wedding planning moved forward, the comments got sharper and more specific. Brianna asked, more than once, whether Ethan could actually afford a real venue. Courtney offered to help me keep things realistic. Sophia insisted I should not wear a dress with a train, that trains were for women with backing, she said, watching me measure tool across my kitchen table. "Why would people laugh?" I asked. She touched the fabric with 2 fingers, like it might be contagious. "Because some styles need something standing behind them." That word, backing, sat in my chest for days. As if a woman needed a bank account guarding her back before she was allowed to be beautiful. Then came the bachelorette weekend. I had asked for something small, dinner, music, cake. They booked a rooftop lounge instead, everything white and gold and expensive, and called it a gift. During the toast, Brianna raised her glass and announced that I was proof a woman could marry up even from outside the right circles. A few guests laughed, unsure if it was meant as a joke. I knew it was not. Later, Sophia put a plastic tiara on my head in the bathroom. "Practice," she whispered. "Maybe one day it will look natural on you." I took it off in front of the mirror, under lights that made my face look tired and small. Courtney came in a few minutes later. "Do not get sensitive," she said. "Brianna is just trying to make you laugh." It did not make me laugh. She leaned against the sink and added, "Women climbing up need thick skin." I let that one go too. I understand now that every insult you let pass without naming it becomes a green light for the next one. Ethan noticed something was wrong. One night, over reheated soup in mismatched bowls. He asked me directly if my friends were hurting me. "They are just intense," I said. He set down his spoon. "Danny," he said, "intensity should not make you shrink." I did not listen. I wanted an easy path to the altar, one where I did not lose friendships, one where I could pretend jealousy was too harsh a word for people who had once slept on my couch during hard years. Ethan did not push, but he started watching more closely. Once, while I was on speakerphone with Courtney in the kitchen, he heard her tell me my dress needed to look aspirational without seeming like a costume. He set down the knife he had been using to chop basil. "Put her on speaker," he said. I shook my head. "I do not want to fight," I told him. "You do not need to fight to set a boundary," he answered. I told him he did not understand our history, that these women had been there when my mother got sick, that they had helped me move twice, that we had survived hard years together. He listened without interrupting, then wiped down the cutting board. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the people who were there for your pain believe that gives them a say in your joy." That line irritated me because it was true. My dress was born out of that same stubbornness. Not designer, better, because it was mine. I made it with Marisol, a seamstress with small hands and a sharp, exacting eye, the kind who had trained under my mother years earlier. I bought ivory silk on clearance. My mother had left behind a box of antique lace before she passed, and I used a strip of it along the edge of the veil. Every fitting felt like a conversation with her. "The train goes long," Marisol insisted, pins in her mouth, while I hesitated in front of the mirror. "Maybe it is too much," I said. She met my eyes in the reflection. "Too much for who?" That is why the dress hurt so much lying on that dressing room floor. It was not just fabric. It was 8 months of savings, memory, and small decisions about dignity stitched into every seam. The wedding was set at a restored countryside estate outside the city. Ethan said a family friend had offered the venue as a gift, and I never asked too many questions. The grounds had manicured hedge gardens, a stone fountain older than the house itself, and a private chapel with carved oak doors that looked like they belonged in a cathedral rather than a backyard wedding. It felt too beautiful for what Ethan had described as a modest ceremony, but when I raised an eyebrow, he simply took my hand. "I want to see you walk in through the trees," he said. I accepted that answer. I should not have. 2 days before the wedding, standing in that chapel and admiring the carved doors, I noticed the staff greeted Ethan by name, not politely, but deferentially, the way people greet someone whose signature actually means something. When I asked the estate coordinator a simple question about seating, she looked at Ethan first, waiting for his nod before she would answer me at all. I should have asked more questions. I told myself later that trusting someone means leaving their silences intact. I know better now. Some silences are locked rooms with something important behind the door, and 2 days before my wedding, I had no idea how large that room really was. Margaret Cole, on the other hand, asked questions. Plenty of them. I met her properly for the first time at the menu tasting, 4 days before the wedding. She arrived without warning, settled into the chair beside me, as if she had known me for years, and within 10 minutes had learned more about my life than my own mother would have thought to ask. Who were my bridesmaids? How long had I known them? And why? She wanted to know, had Brianna requested private access to the bridal suite 2 full days before the ceremony? I blinked. Requested access? Margaret sipped her water, unbothered. The coordinator noted it. She said. She wanted to drop off gifts early. I had not heard anything about gifts. Margaret did not press the point. She simply let it sit on the table between us, like something she expected me to pick up later. That comment came back to me the night before the wedding, when my bridesmaids arrived at the rehearsal dinner in matching mauve, their smiles just a little too sharp. Brianna complained that the estate felt rustic in a way that seemed forced, like the family was trying too hard to appear understated. Courtney asked, not quite joking, whether Ethan's guest list would be mostly landscapers. Sophia said at least there would be good flowers. That was the same evening I truly met Margaret, in the way a room adjusts itself around certain people without being told to. She wore no visible jewelry and did not need any. She crossed the room to Ethan and folded him into a hug with a tenderness that softened something tight in my chest. "Mom," he said, "this is Danielle." Margaret took both of my hands. "Finally," she said, "not welcome to the family, not you are lovely, just finally, as if I had arrived somewhere that had been waiting for me all along." Across the room, I saw Brianna lean towards Sophia and whisper something. Sophia laughed, dry and quick. Margaret saw it too. Her expression did not change, but her eyes lingered on them a beat too long to mean nothing. Later, she asked me to walk the garden with her. She mentioned that Ethan had told her about my mother's lace. I nodded, and she understood immediately that it was not just a dress. Tomorrow, she said, touching a magnolia leaf, whatever happens, do not let anyone talk you into walking in small. I thought she meant nerves. I understand now that she meant war. The morning of the wedding smelled like fresh bread, wet earth, and cut flowers drifting through the open windows of the bridal suite. My dress hung near the mirror inside a garment bag. I looked at it before breakfast, and, for one quiet second, felt like my mother was standing in the room with me. The suite was large, with cream curtains and a vanity lined with warm bulbs, bobby pins, perfume, an untouched glass of champagne, and my bouquet resting under a damp cloth. At the back, a small service door led to a staff corridor. The coordinator mentioned that only authorized staff could use it. Brianna looked at that door a beat too long. How practical, she said, while the stylist divided my hair into sections. I did not understand the comment then. I thought she meant moving around without wrinkling the dress. Looking back, I remember Sophia asking where the alteration scissors were kept. I remember Courtney insisting she stay behind alone to tidy the vanity. Warning signs rarely arrive with sirens. Sometimes they arrive as a casual question and a hand resting too close to a door handle. Brianna showed up with champagne to relax the bride. Courtney carried a makeup case. Sophia walked in on the phone, telling the photographer to avoid angles that were too honest. I pretended not to hear. For the first hour, everything felt almost normal. They curled my hair, dabbed lotion on my shoulders, arranged the bouquet. Courtney touched the garment bag once and commented that it must be heavy. Only a little, I said. She used the word brave, with a softness that did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like a warning. Sophia played music on her phone louder than the hour called for. Courtney closed the service door without being asked. I was too busy trying not to smudge my nail polish to notice how deliberately the room was being sealed. Marisol, my seamstress, had promised to arrive before I put the dress on. Car trouble delayed her. She texted at 9:30. Do not put the dress on without me, she wrote. That bodice has a soul and a temper. I laughed at the message, then put my phone away. If Marisol had arrived 20 minutes earlier, maybe none of it would have happened. But stories rarely break because of one absence. They break because someone decides to use it. A coordinator knocked and asked me to confirm the processional order. A florist had moved 2 arrangements. I glanced at the covered dress and said I would be back in 10 minutes. Brianna smiled, soft as sugar. Go ahead, she said. We will watch everything. Those words were the last bridge before the fire. The hallway smelled of jasmine and floor wax. From the chapel came the low murmur of arriving guests, a cellist warming up somewhere out of sight. The flower issue was minor. 2 columns had been swapped. I approved the change, signed a clipboard, and turned back toward the suite. As I got closer, I heard laughter. Not nervous laughter, but low and sustained, the kind that belongs to people who do not expect to be interrupted. I opened the door, and the air left my lungs. Courtney was holding a champagne flute near the mirror. Sophia had a fistful of torn lace. Brianna still had the scissors open in her hand, admiring them like jewelry. On the floor, my train lay in ruins, pearls scattered everywhere. The bodice had been slashed clean down the front. One sleeve was draped over the makeup chair like it had been discarded on purpose. And across the mirror, written in my own lipstick, in handwriting I would recognize anywhere, those same 3 words. Know your place. I did not scream. My throat closed like a hand had reached inside and pressed it shut. What did you do? I finally managed. Sophia looked at the scissors, then at me, almost gently. Corrected a mistake, she said. Courtney set the lace down on a chair. Danielle, please, she said. You were about to embarrass yourself. Brianna stepped closer, using that honeyed voice she saved for cruelty. A wedding at an estate like this is already borrowed enough, she said. That dress made you look like a little girl playing heiress. The word heiress hit me strangely, like a stone thrown from somewhere I could not yet see. I stepped toward the wreckage and knelt down. The bodice had a slash exactly where Marisol had hidden a blue stitch for my mother, a private joke between the three of us. My knees pressed into silk, still damp with champagne. My mother sewed this, I said. Courtney sighed. Do not use that to guilt us, she said. Sophia dropped the scissors onto the table with a hard clatter. Ethan is not going to cancel over a dress, she said. Or something simple. You will look more realistic. That is when I understood. They had not done this to save me from embarrassment. They wanted me to walk in broken. They wanted every guest to compare the estate, the flowers, the beautiful groom, and the improvised bride, and finally confirm what they had been hinting at for months. That I did not belong. I stood up slowly. Put the scissors down, I said. Do not touch anything else. This is evidence. Brianna blinked. Excuse me? My voice came out lower than I expected, but steady. Nobody touches anything else. Sophia laughed. Evidence of what? Bad taste? The door opened before I could answer. Margaret Cole walked in, flanked by two women in gray suits and an older man wearing white gloves. The hallway noise behind her seemed to fall away. She did not look surprised at the ruined dress on the floor. She looked confirmed. Her eyes moved from the fabric to the scissors, to my bridesmaids, and finally to me. Danielle, she said, are you hurt? That was the first adult question anyone had asked me all morning. I shook my head. Just the dress, I said. Margaret crossed to the table. The man in gloves lifted the scissors carefully into a clear evidence bag. One of the women in gray photographed the ruined gown from several angles. The other closed the door behind them, quiet and final. Courtney went pale. Mrs. Cole, this is a misunderstanding, she said. Margaret did not look at her yet. Misunderstandings do not leave cut lace on the floor, she said. Sophia tried to smile. We were only trying to help, she said. Danielle seemed confused about what suited her. Margaret raised a hand, not sharply, just enough. Do not ever again call cruelty guidance, she said. The silence that followed had real weight. I stood beside my ruined gown with cold hands, and Margaret turned to me, taking both of them in hers. Ethan should have told you sooner, she said. He is not simply a contractor. He is the eldest heir of the Cole family. I heard my own breathing. Somewhere beyond the walls, the cello began again, one long note drifting in from another world entirely. I do not understand, I said. Margaret held my hands firmly. He studied construction because he loves building things with his hands, she said. He wanted to be loved without the name attached. But this estate, these gardens, a majority of the hotels your bridesmaids have probably stayed in themselves, they all belong to our family. Sophia's smile disappeared. Courtney's hand rose to her throat. Brianna stared at the ruined dress like the price of every cut had just multiplied in front of her. I thought of Ethan with mud on his boots, sketching garden beds for elderly women who paid him in cash and lemonade. I thought about every deflected question, every quiet evasion about his family. A flicker of betrayal moved through me, but it was not shaped the same way theirs was. His had come from fear. Theirs had come from intention. Margaret released my hands. Now, the important part, she said. That was not the only dress. The man in white gloves opened the door again. Two assistants entered carrying a long box wrapped in gray satin. Behind them came a seamstress, a hairstylist, and a woman holding a small velvet case. Brianna stepped back. This is ridiculous, she said. Margaret did not blink. Ridiculous was believing a woman loses her wedding because you three lost your decency. The seamstress opened the box. Inside was a gown the color of aged ivory, but somehow alive, not gaudy, simply flawless. The skirt fell like poured water. The bodice held tiny embroidered leaves in silver thread. A row of seed pearls traced a branch pattern at the waist. Folded beneath tissue paper was a veil, and on a small tray beside it, a delicate tiara set with antique diamonds. Not a crown. A promise made visible. This belonged to Ethan's grandmother, Margaret said. We restored it years ago. When Ethan told us about you, I asked that it be fitted to your measurements. I could not speak. Why? I finally asked. Margaret glanced at the ruined dress on the floor. Because a family with money learns to recognize envy, she said, and because I saw exactly how these three looked at you the moment you walked into a room. It was not gentle, the way she said it. It was precise. My bridesmaids all began speaking over each other. Brianna claimed no one had warned them. Courtney insisted it had been a cruel joke that went too far, nothing intentional. Sophia accused Margaret of setting a trap. I lifted my hand, and inexplicably, they all stopped. Do not blame them for not knowing who Ethan was, I said. Blame them for knowing exactly who I was, and still wanting to destroy me. Margaret looked at me with something close to pride. Exactly, she said. The man in gloves spoke for the first time. Mrs. Cole, security is ready. Margaret nodded. Not yet, she said. Let them stay until Danielle leaves the room. Brianna's mouth opened. You cannot hold us here, she said. Margaret's smile was thin. You are free to leave, she said. But the hallways have cameras. The scissors are already secured, and the destroyed dress will be formally assessed. I would recommend staying somewhere there are witnesses. For the first time all morning, none of them had a quick answer. The transformation began. The seamstress, Celia, had white hair and the soft voice of someone who had dressed crying women more than once. She peeled away my ruined sleeves with practiced calm. The hairstylist reset the pins the earlier struggle had loosened. The woman with the velvet case wiped my hands with a warm cloth. Breathe with me, Celia said, and I tried. The antique gown was heavier than mine had been, not with weight, but with history. Sliding into it felt like the silk had been waiting years for exactly this moment. Celia fastened the tiny buttons up my spine, one by one. Across the room, Sophia's face had gone pale near the window. Courtney stared at the floor. I did not feel sorry for them. It disturbed me a little how much I did not. The hairstylist arranged 2 loose strands around my face and pinned the veil in with pearl clips. Then came the tiara. When it settled onto my head, I did not feel grandeur. I felt weight, not the weight of money, but the weight of walking in whole. Margaret stood behind me at the mirror. Look at yourself, she said. At first, I could not. I was afraid of seeing a stranger. When I finally lifted my eyes, I saw my pale face, my dried tears, my trembling mouth, and beneath all of it, my straightened shoulders, my intact dress, a woman who had found another door inside a room that had just been destroyed. That is not her, I whispered. Margaret misunderstood. Who? She asked. I looked at the ruins of my first dress on the floor, the one they had wanted me to wear broken, the version they wanted walking through those chapel doors. Margaret handed me a handkerchief. Then walk in as the one you actually are, she said. Before I left, I knelt beside the wreckage one final time. Celia moved to stop me, but I shook my head. I was not hiding evidence. I only wanted one thing, a single surviving flower of embroidery from my mother's lace, small enough to have escaped the blades. I tucked it into my bouquet. This comes with me, I said. Margaret nodded. The rest stays as evidence, she said. The suite doors opened. My former bridesmaids did not walk out behind me. 2 security staff escorted them down a side corridor instead. No roughness, no raised voices, just quiet procedural courtesy that stripped away any last chance at making a scene. Brianna caught my eye just before the hallway split us apart. Danielle, please, she said, do not do this. I almost laughed. I did not do this, I told her. You did. Downstairs, past the wide oak doors, an entire chapel full of guests had no idea that a small war had just ended 2 floors above their heads. And in a matter of minutes, dressed in a gown built for a family I had not even known existed that morning, I would walk toward a man who owed me the truth, and toward a version of my own life I had not known I had the courage to claim. The chapel doors closed behind me for one long, private moment before my entrance. Beyond the carved wood, I could hear the low hum of 100 conversations, perfume and silk and expectation pressed into every pew. My father had not lived to walk me down the aisle. I had decided months earlier to walk alone, and standing there in a dead woman's tiara and my mother's last surviving thread of lace, that choice finally felt less like loss and more like something earned. The music started. The doors opened. The hush that followed was almost physical, a held breath spreading backward through the room. People rose first out of habit, then stayed standing out of something closer to disbelief. I watched heads turn, hands pause mid-motion, a few mouths fall open. Light came through the stained glass and soft gold panels and settled over the embroidered leaves of the gown like something had been poured over me. The veil floated slightly behind each step. Near the front row, the tiara caught the light and made an older woman lower her eyes, as if she had looked directly at the sun. At the altar stood Ethan. He was not wearing the simple gray suit I had expected. He had on a dark, understated jacket that fit like it had been made for exactly this morning, with a small pin on the lapel I did not recognize yet, the Cole family crest, small and unassuming, the kind of detail only certain people in the room would notice immediately. Around him stood men and women who did not look like ordinary guests. They looked like people used to deciding large things quietly. But Ethan was not looking at any of them. He was looking at me like the air had left his chest. When I reached him, his eyes were wet. "Danielle," he said, low enough that only I could hear. This was not a moment for a long conversation, but I needed one sentence. "You owed me the truth," I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know," he said, "and I owe you a whole life without ever hiding anything from you again." I did not forgive everything standing there. That would be a lie. But I saw his fear, his shame, and underneath it, love without armor. I also understood something else. When everything fell apart that morning, his family had not asked me to make myself smaller. They had given me exactly what I needed to walk in, standing straighter than ever. The officiant waited. Ethan took my hand. "Do you still want to do this?" he asked quietly. That question mattered more than anything stitched into the dress. I looked at the full chapel, at the bouquet holding my mother's last piece of lace, at Ethan's uncertain, honest eyes. "Yes," I said, "but we are talking about everything later." His mouth trembled into something between a smile and an apology. "Everything," he agreed. The ceremony continued. It was not flawless. My heart pounded too hard through every line. Each vow left my mouth tangled with anger and love in equal measure. When Ethan promised to honor me, his voice cracked on the word. When I promised to walk beside him, I added one extra word that was not in the script. "Whole." The officiant glanced up. Ethan squeezed my hand tighter. "We are married," he whispered, before the words were officially spoken. When they finally were, the kiss was brief. I did not want to turn my pain into a performance. Still, when we faced the room, applause rose like a wave. A few guests cried without quite knowing why. Others glanced toward the empty seats near the front where my bridesmaids should have been sitting. The reception moved to the estate's main garden. I assumed Ethan would wait until the end of the night to say anything. He did not. After the first toast, he asked for a microphone. The late afternoon sun spread gold across the tablecloths. Glasses caught the light. The music paused. Before he spoke, a staff member wheeled a narrow table to the edge of the garden entrance. On it sat 3 folders, a clear evidence bag holding the scissors, and printed photographs of the ruined gown. Nothing oversized, nothing meant to shock for its own sake, just enough that no one could later claim we had exaggerated. Brianna spotted the table from across the lawn. Her face changed instantly. Courtney's tears paused mid-fall. Sophia looked toward the hedges, calculating an exit that did not exist without walking straight past security. Margaret did not sit. She stood near the table like someone guarding a flame in the wind. Ethan took my hand. "Before we celebrate," he said, "I need to say something." The garden went quiet. This morning, before the ceremony, 3 women who stood as Danielle's bridesmaids destroyed the wedding dress she built with her own hands, using lace from her late mother. A murmur rippled through the crowd like smoke. "I want to be clear," Ethan continued. "Their failure was not disrespecting my family. Their failure was trying to humiliate the woman I love on the one day she deserved to feel the most supported." My throat tightened. Margaret stood motionless at the front of the garden. "Cole Holdings will be pursuing damages," Ethan said, "for destruction of property, unauthorized access, and any applicable liability. But no lawsuit will ever matter as much as this." He looked directly at Brianna, Courtney, and Sophia. "No one gets to make small a woman who already decided to walk in whole." That line cracked the afternoon wide open. Security appeared at the edge of the garden with my 3 former bridesmaids beside them. No handcuffs, none were needed. Their dresses were wrinkled, their faces bloodless, their hands empty of the champagne flutes and phones they usually clutched like armor. No one shouted insults. The silence itself was heavier than anything anyone could have said. Brianna tried anyway. "Danielle, say something," she called out. I took the microphone from Ethan's hand. For one second I saw them as they had been years earlier, young, broke, ambitious, splitting cheap takeout with me on someone's dorm floor. I searched myself for sadness. I found exhaustion instead. "I trusted you," I said. That ends today. Sophia's composure finally broke. We did not know who he was, she said. The words rippled discomfort through the nearby guests. I held the microphone steady. You knew exactly who I was, I said. That is the part you could not forgive. I did not say anything else. I did not need to. Security walked them out slowly, publicly, without a single hand raised against them, just the complete, irreversible collapse of every mask they had worn for years. At the edge of the corridor, they scattered, each one grabbing for a different excuse. Brianna demanded to speak with the estate manager. Courtney claimed she needed to call a lawyer, though she could not remember the number. Sophia insisted the entire scene had been staged by wealthy people looking for a reason to ruin them. The head of security, a broad, unhurried man named Dorsey, never raised his voice once. You are welcome to make your calls, he said, in front of witnesses. Sophia gestured wildly toward the garden. You cannot treat us like criminals, she said. Dorsey glanced at the bag of scissors resting on the table nearby. Then stop acting like evidence is decoration, he said. They were led to a small administrative office inside the estate. No one restrained them. No one raised a hand. They were simply no longer permitted back into the garden to construct a different version of the morning. The music eventually found its way back into the air, different now, more honest somehow. Ethan touched my cheek gently. Forgive me, he said, for hiding my name. The garden smelled of gardenias, spilled wine, and warm earth. Do not ever hide behind a decision that is mine to make too, I told him. Never again, he said. I did not know yet whether this marriage would be easy. That evening, though, I learned something important. Love could carry clumsy, hidden mistakes and still be real, as long as an apology came with the whole truth attached, and with the willingness to face whatever came after. The celebration continued in a strange, more honest key than before. Guests who had stood frozen during Ethan's speech now approached to embrace me, some crying, some simply squeezing my hand. Marisol arrived late, breathless, having spent the morning helping document the destroyed gown for the estate's records. When she saw me in Ethan's grandmother's dress, she pressed both hands to her chest. Your mother would have wanted to inspect every stitch, she said. I laughed and cried at the same time. She would have criticized at least two of them, I said. Marisol touched the small scrap of lace tucked into my bouquet. But she would have loved this, she said. Yes, I whispered. She really would have. None of us yet knew how far the consequences would travel, how 3 careers built on borrowed image and social polish were about to collapse in slow motion, one notification, one canceled contract, one dropped sponsorship at a time. That story was only beginning, and it would prove far more satisfying than anything scissors could ever cut apart. 3 weeks after the wedding, Brianna, Courtney, and Sophia each received a legal notice by courier. The assessment of the destroyed dress included hours of skilled labor, material costs, the value of the antique lace, and documented emotional damages tied to the events of the ceremony. There was also a separate inquiry into unauthorized access to a restricted area, because a hallway camera had clearly captured Sophia lifting the scissors from a locked supply cart, meant only for event staff. None of them went to prison. This was never that kind of story, but they paid in ways that turned out to be far more permanent than a courtroom sentence. The settlement was not immediate. First, they tried denying the cuts had even happened with intent, claiming it had all been a bridesmaid prank that got out of hand. Then, once the hallway footage and photographs from the suite made that version impossible to maintain, they pivoted. Their lawyer sent a letter claiming I had provoked them with what he called my air of superiority throughout the engagement. I read that letter sitting in Margaret's study, surrounded by walls of old law books, Ethan beside me, watching my face like he expected the words to wound me again. They did not. They just made me tired. They want me guilty of surviving, I said. Margaret closed the folder without hesitation. Then that gets answered with documents too, she said. And it was. Marisol testified to the true value of the labor and materials. The event coordinator confirmed the unauthorized request for early suite access. Household staff described the sealed service door. The security company handed over the full corridor footage. I submitted photographs from every fitting, along with text messages where my former bridesmaids had mocked the dress in the weeks before destroying it. The outcome arrived before any explanation could soften it. They were required to accept financial responsibility and issue a formal written apology. Afterward came the full breakdown: materials, labor hours, the restoration cost of the surviving lace, damage to the ceremony itself, and the added expense of the emergency response that morning. It was not poetic justice. It was something better. It was verifiable. They lost more than money. Contracts disappeared. Invitations stopped arriving. Doors that used to open easily started sticking. Brianna had built a career styling events for a luxury lifestyle brand. She was suspended within days of the hallway footage reaching her employer. Courtney made her living selling a curated, likable image online and watched her sponsorships evaporate one by one as the story quietly circulated. Sophia, who tried hardest to hold on to her old life, eventually had to sell her car just to cover the first installment of the settlement. Courtney attempted a comeback months later, showing up again at industry events like nothing had happened. No one banned her from the city. Life does not work that cleanly. But the brightest doors no longer opened as easily as before. Wealthy clients forgive a great many things. What they do not forgive is imagining their own daughters crying over a ruined wedding gown. Brianna posted a long video about mental health awareness. She never used my name. She called herself a victim of a disproportionate backlash. The comments underneath were cold and specific. Someone wrote that mental health is not measured in scissors. She deleted the video within a day. Sophia was the only one who truly disappeared. She moved out of the city, took a logistics job somewhere quiet, and stopped attending anything related to weddings altogether. A mutual friend mentioned once that she never brought the topic up anymore. I did not ask further. Justice that requires eternal monitoring becomes its own kind of prison, and I did not want to live inside one just to watch 3 women serve out a sentence I no longer needed to witness. My marriage with Ethan did not begin easily either. Our first night as husband and wife was not spent in a honeymoon suite decorated with rose petals. We sat on the balcony until sunrise instead, working through everything he had kept hidden: the family fortune, the years spent building a separate identity, the fear that I might love him differently if I knew the name attached to him from the start. I did not want to buy your love, he said. I watched the garden lights dim below us. By hiding, I told him, you took away my chance to choose with the whole truth in front of me. That sentence landed hard. I saw it hit him, and he did not try to defend himself. You are right, he said. That was the first honest brick in something sturdier than what we had before. The second brick arrived with the money itself. Not romantic, but necessary. Ethan wanted accounts, properties, and structures laid out plainly between us. He did not ask me to sign anything that first week. He simply opened folders, explained holdings, and showed me exactly how much of his life had lived behind the word contractor. I listened until my head ached, not from ambition, but from vertigo. Discovering the man you love has more money than you imagined is one thing. Discovering that half the people at your wedding already knew, while you were the only one protected by a gentle lie, felt like its own quiet kind of confinement. For weeks, Ethan had to learn not to make decisions for me just to spare me discomfort. If a driver was waiting, he would ask whether I wanted to use the car. If a security guard suggested a route, he explained the reasoning instead of simply steering me along it. If Margaret sent an invitation, he gave me context before accepting on my behalf. It was not flawless. Sometimes he moved too fast, and I reacted harder than the moment required. But that clumsiness was different from betrayal. Clumsiness gets corrected when 2 people are willing to look at the same wound together. Betrayal asks one person to close their eyes so the other can stay comfortable. I did not move into the main coal estate right away. I stayed in my apartment for 3 more months. Ethan came by with plants, takeout, and honest answers. Margaret never pushed. She invited me for lunches and talked about the family like she was handing me a map instead of a set of chains. My apartment became our neutral ground. No staff, no display cases, no portraits of ancestors with long, important names, just a leaking bathroom faucet and a wobbly table that tilted if you leaned on the wrong corner. Ethan learned to fold a napkin under the short leg. Watching him kneel there in an expensive suit with a jeweler's patience made me laugh more than 100 apologies could have. One Saturday, he arrived with a toolbox and repaired the crooked shelf where I kept my sewing thread. He did not do it to seem humble. He did it because the shelf was crooked. That small, unglamorous difference did more for me than any grand gesture ever could have. Margaret had to earn her place with me too. Her first visit to my apartment came without expensive gifts. She brought a handwritten recipe book that had belonged to her mother and a bag of lemons, and she asked permission before stepping into my kitchen. That gesture meant more to me than any tiara ever could. Through all of it, I understood something uncomfortable. My anger was not only about Ethan hiding his name. It was about years of allowing other women to decide my worth for me. The Cole family's wealth did not heal that. It only made the wound easier to see clearly. One afternoon, Ethan brought me to a private archive room where old family garments were preserved. His grandmother's gown rested there again, cleaned and restored. My small scrap of surviving lace sat beside it, protected under glass. Beneath it, a small plate read, Danielle Reyes Cole, Walk-in Hole. I touched the glass. Who wrote that? I asked. Margaret smiled. I did, she said. For the first time, I hugged her without hesitation. Months later, I opened a small studio with Marisol. Not high-end couture, though we made some of that too. We called it the Wide Door. We offered restoration, dress loans, and original designs for women who refused to enter their most important days feeling small because of what they could not afford. Part of the funding came from Cole Holdings. Part came from my own earnings. I chose a space with tall windows and worn wooden floors, not a glossy showroom, but somewhere a woman could breathe before facing a mirror. Near the entrance, we kept a low table with tea, pins, and soft tissues. Marisol insisted on quality tissues. Crying into rough paper, she said, was its own small indignity nobody deserved. The first week brought more stories than clients. A bride whose father said she was not worth the expense. A divorced woman remarrying, worried her daughters might feel ashamed. A young seamstress who could not afford design school, but stitched sleeves like she understood architecture instinctively. Every gown demanded the same question. Not how much can you pay? Not what are you trying to hide? But how do you want to walk in? Some chose simplicity. Some wanted shine. Some asked for sleeves, capes, colors their families once called excessive. I learned quickly not to confuse restraint with fear. A woman can choose something simple because she wants to. It becomes cruelty only when she is pushed into it by shame instead. The first dress we completed went to a rural school teacher who wanted long sleeves to hide a scar along her arm. Marisol looked at her the way she had once looked at me. The sleeve is not there to hide you, she told her. It is there so you decide when to reveal it. That day, I understood my ruined dress had not ended on that dressing room floor. It had simply changed shape. Brianna once wrote to me, nearly a year later. She did not ask to see me. She sent a long message full of guilt, therapy language, and reflections on insecurity. She said she had envied me long before she ever knew about Ethan's family. She said cutting the dress had been a panic response, not real cruelty. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote one line back. I got your message. I hope you never call cruelty honesty again. Nothing more. Not every story needs reconciliation. Some just need a door closed with a quiet goodbye. The original dress, or what remained of it, was never thrown away. It sits inside the studio now, protected in a side display case, not for spectacle, but for private lessons about boundaries, trust, and dignity. The loose pearls rest in a small glass jar. The scissors remain under legal custody elsewhere, far from us both. When a new bride asks why I keep torn fabric on display, I tell her the truth. Because some days someone will try to convince you your story is finished, and sometimes all you need is to look closely at the pieces and decide exactly what you refuse to hand over. Ethan waits for me most evenings after those sessions end. Sometimes he brings flowers. Sometimes there is still dirt on his boots. He still designs gardens, only now under his full name when it matters, and with his hands buried in soil whenever he simply wants to be. Our marriage did not begin perfectly. It began with a ruined gown, a hidden truth, and a family that arrived carrying a box wrapped in gray satin. But it also began with a decision that was entirely mine. I chose not to run. I chose to preserve the evidence. I chose to walk through the wide doors with my mother's lace tucked into my bouquet. I chose to speak when the women who broke me demanded silence instead. That morning, my bridesmaids cut my dress apart to teach me my place. What they never understood was that my place was never in the fabric at all. It was in the way I stood back up, looked squarely at the pieces, and kept walking anyway.